Hercule Poirot and the Affair of the 13 Dinner Plates, Chapter 1. An invitation to dine Captain Hastings had observed on numerous occasions that the most intriguing cases often began with the most innocuous of circumstances. This particular affair, one which would later become known to us as the curious incident of the 13 dinner plates, commenced with nothing more remarkable than the Morning Post. It was a dreary November day, with a persistent London fog that seemed to seep through the very walls of our comfortable lodgings. The weather had turned Poirot particularly fastidious. He had spent the morning arranging his collection of silver spoons with geometric precision, while lamenting the effect of the dampness on his moustache. "Mon ami," he said, looking up from his task as I entered the sitting-room with the mail, "you observe how the humidity causes the ends to droop? It is most distressing." I smiled indulgently at my friend's vanity. "Perhaps this might distract you," I said, handing him a cream-colored envelope addressed in an elegant, if somewhat tremulous hand. Poirot examined the envelope with interest before opening it with his silver letter knife, a tool he insisted was superior to all others for the task. His eyes scanned the contents, and I noticed a slight raising of his eyebrows. "Ah," he said, "it appears we are to have a little diversion, Hastings. Lady Constance Whitmore requests the pleasure of our company at Ravenswood Manor for a weekend party." "Lady Whitmore? The name is familiar." "Indeed. She is a collector of considerable reputation, particularly renowned for her Chinese porcelain. According to this invitation, she is to unveil her most treasured acquisition, a complete set of 13 Ming Dynasty dinner plates." 13 seems an unusual number, I remarked. "Précisément. Each plate, it says here, depicts a different scene from Chinese mythology. They are to be displayed at a special dinner party." Poirot's eyes gleamed with the appreciation of a fellow collector. "Such a collection would be of inestimable value, Hastings. And she's invited you to view them? It appears that Lady Constance has heard of my little successes and wishes for me to authenticate her treasures." He smiled, touching his moustache. "We shall accept, of course." 2 days later found us on a train bound for Berkshire, where Ravenswood Manor had stood since Elizabethan times. The fog had lifted, giving way to a crisp clarity that rendered the countryside in sharp relief. Skeletal trees stood against a pewter sky, their branches occasionally stirred by a cutting wind. "I have made some inquiries about our hostess," Poirot said, as we watched the landscape pass. "Lady Constance is the widow of Sir Edward Whitmore, a diplomat who spent many years in the Far East. She is known for her, how do you say, eccentricities, but her knowledge of porcelain is respected even by the curators of the British Museum." Our arrival at the small country station was met by a chauffeur who loaded our luggage into a gleaming Daimler. The drive to Ravenswood took us through winding lanes bordered by ancient hedgerows before we turned onto a gravel drive flanked by venerable oak trees. The manor itself emerged from the gathering dusk, a grand edifice of weathered stone with mullioned windows that glinted in the fading light. As we approached, I could see that additions had been made over the centuries, creating a harmonious blend of architectural styles. A butler received us in the entrance hall, where a great fire burned in a massive stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the oak-panelled walls. "Mr. Poirot and Captain Hastings," he intoned. "The other guests are gathered in the drawing-room before dinner. If you would follow me." The drawing-room presented a scene of elegant comfort. Deep armchairs were arranged around another fireplace where flames crackled merrily. The assembled company turned as we entered. Our hostess rose to greet us, a tiny woman with silver hair arranged in an elaborate coiffure, her frail form draped in black silk, and an impressive array of pearls. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, extending a hand adorned with rings. "How delightful that you could accept my invitation, and Captain Hastings, too. You are most welcome to Ravenswood." Poirot bowed over her hand. "The pleasure is ours, Lady Constance. Your invitation was most intriguing." Lady Constance introduced us to the other guests. Frederick Whitmore, her nephew, was a robust man in his 40s with a weathered complexion that spoke of time spent outdoors. His wife Olivia was considerably younger, a striking woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes that assessed us coolly. Professor Harold Chambers, stooped and bespectacled, had the distracted air of a scholar. Miss Amelia Devonish, Lady Constance's companion, was a Mulsey woman who hovered protectively near her employer. Jonathan Harker from Sotheby's was impeccably dressed, with the smooth manner of one accustomed to dealing with wealthy clients. Elizabeth Chen, elegant in a silk cheongsam, greeted us with a formal nod. Completing the party was Mr. Reginald Fortescue, Lady Constance's solicitor, a corpulent man with a florid complexion. As drinks were served, I observed the interactions of our fellow guests. Frederick Whitmore conversed intensely with Mr. Fortescue in a corner, their expressions suggesting the topic was not entirely pleasant. Professor Chambers had engaged Dr. Chen in what appeared to be a scholarly debate, while Miss Devonish watched Lady Constance with an almost maternal vigilance. "I have gathered you all here," Lady Constance announced, tapping her glass for attention. "Not merely for the pleasure of your company, though that is considerable, but for a significant announcement." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to our hostess. As you know, the Ming Dynasty plates have been the pride of the Whitmore collection for generations. I had always intended that they should pass to Frederick upon my death. She paused, her gaze resting momentarily on her nephew. "However, I have decided that such treasures belong to the nation. Therefore, I am donating the entire set to the British Museum." A palpable tension gripped the room. Frederick Whitmore's face flushed darkly, while his wife laid a restraining hand on his arm. Professor Chambers nodded approvingly, and Mr. Harker appeared to be mentally recalculating something. Before dinner, Lady Constance continued, seemingly oblivious to the effect of her words, "I wish you all to view the collection in its entirety, something few have had the privilege to do. Afterward, we shall dine beneath their benevolent gaze." She led us from the drawing-room across the hall to what had once been a small ballroom. The space had been transformed into a display area, with 13 illuminated pedestals arranged in a perfect circle at its center. Upon each pedestal rested a plate of exquisite beauty, the blue and white porcelain glowing with an almost ethereal quality in the carefully directed light. "Magnificent," breathed Poirot, adjusting his pince-nez to better examine the nearest plate, which depicted a sinuous dragon coiled among clouds. "Each plate," explained Lady Constance, "represents one of the principal figures of Chinese mythology. The collection took my late husband 20 years to complete. We moved around the circle, admiring each masterpiece in turn. I noticed that Professor Chambers lingered particularly over a plate, showing a phoenix rising from flames, his expression unreadable behind his thick spectacles. After we had completed our circuit, Lady Constance gestured toward the dining room. "Shall we proceed to dinner? The plates will remain here for your further enjoyment later." As if on cue, the lights throughout the manor flickered dramatically, plunging us into momentary darkness. A collective gasp rose from the assembled guests. When the illumination returned mere seconds later, Poirot's sharp intake of breath drew my attention. "Regardez Hastings," he murmured. One of the pedestals stood empty, its light shining on nothing but air. The phoenix plate had vanished. Chapter 2, The First Disappearance. "My plate! My phoenix!" Lady Constance's cry pierced the stunned silence. She rushed forward, her frail hands fluttering about the empty pedestal, as if the missing treasure might somehow reappear. Poirot stepped forward with remarkable swiftness. "No one is to leave this room," he commanded, his voice gentle but firm. "If you please, Lady Constance, compose yourself. We shall discover what has happened." The elderly woman clutched at her pearls, visibly trembling. "It's impossible." "How could anyone—" "That is what we must determine," interrupted Poirot. "The plate was there but moments ago, and now it is gone. Someone in this room must have taken it during those few seconds of darkness." Frederick Whitmore made a sound of impatience. "This is absurd. None of us could have moved quickly enough in the dark to steal the plate and conceal it. Nevertheless, monsieur, it has happened, Poirot replied. Now, if everyone would kindly account for their movements during the blackout. One by one, the guests recounted their positions. Frederick claimed he had been helping his wife to her seat, a fact Olivia corroborated with a cool nod. Professor Chambers stated he had remained by the displays, examining another plate. Miss Devonish insisted she had been attending to Lady Constance, while Mr. Harker reported, making notes about the collection in his small notebook. Dr. Chen and Mr. Fortescue had apparently been engaged in conversation near the door. No one approached the Phoenix pedestal? Asked Poirot. A chorus of denials followed. Then we must search the room, declared Poirot. The plate cannot have simply vanished. Despite a thorough examination of the display room, no trace of the missing plate was found. Lady Constance, having recovered something of her composure, insisted that dinner proceed as planned. I shall not allow a thief to disrupt my arrangements, she announced with surprising firmness. The meal that followed was a tense affair. Conversation was stilted, with occasional glances exchanged between guests. Lady Constance, however, seemed determined to maintain an appearance of normality. Each plate, Monsieur Poirot, she explained over the soup course, contains a small identifying mark known only to me, a safeguard against forgery. Most wise, murmured Poirot. These marks, they are visible to the naked eye? To those who know where to look, she replied cryptically. My husband was most particular about authentication. As coffee was served in the drawing-room, Lady Constance suddenly rose from her chair, her face contorted. She clutched at her throat, eyes wide with terror. I cannot, she gasped, before collapsing to the carpet. Dr. Chen rushed to her side, loosening the collar of Lady Constance's dress. She's been poisoned, the doctor announced grimly. Call for an ambulance immediately. In the confusion that followed, the lights once again failed. Shouts of alarm echoed through the darkened room. When illumination returned seconds later, Poirot's keen eyes immediately darted to the display room visible through the open doors. Vite, Hastings, he urged, hurrying across the hall. I followed him to discover that a second plate, the one depicting a dragon, had vanished from its pedestal. Mon Dieu, whispered Poirot, this is no simple theft. This is something far more complex. Behind us the sounds of urgency continued as Lady Constance was attended to, but Poirot remained focused on the empty pedestals, his eyes narrowed in concentration. 2 plates gone, Hastings, he murmured. The phoenix and now the dragon. In Chinese mythology, these creatures have special significance. I wonder, his words trailed off as Frederick Whitmore burst into the room, his face pale with shock. My aunt is being taken to hospital, he announced. They don't know if she'll survive the night, Poirot nodded gravely. And now, monsieur, we must contact the police, for we have not merely theft, but attempted murder to investigate. As Frederick left to make the call, I turned to my friend. Surely the 2 incidents must be connected. Indubitably, mon ami. Poirot's expression was troubled as he surveyed the remaining 11 plates. And I fear this is but the beginning. Chapter 3. 12 become 10. The local police arrived with commendable promptness, led by a tall, gaunt man who introduced himself as Inspector Morton. His weathered face suggested years of service, and his shrewd eyes took in the scene with methodical precision. Hercule Poirot, he said, recognition dawning in his expression. Well, that's a bit of luck. I've heard of your work, sir. Grateful to have you here under the circumstances. Inspector, Poirot acknowledged with a slight bow. A most troubling affair, is it not? 2 valuable plates stolen and Lady Whitmore poisoned. Troubling indeed. The inspector removed his hat. I've stationed men at all exits. No one's to leave until we've sorted this out. As the inspector organized his men, news arrived from the hospital. Lady Constance was alive but unconscious, her condition critical. The doctors were working to identify the poison. "Now, Mr. Poirot," said Inspector Morton when we had retreated to the library, "perhaps you'd be good enough to share your observations." Poirot inclined his head. "I should like first to examine the remaining plates, if I may." With the inspector's permission, we returned to the display room. Poirot scrutinized each plate carefully, using his pocket magnifying glass. When he reached the one depicting a monkey, he paused. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured. "The glaze here, it differs slightly from the others." Before I could respond, he straightened and addressed the inspector. "I believe it would be prudent to interview each of our suspects individually." "Suspects?" The inspector raised an eyebrow. "So you're certain it's one of the guests?" "Who else, mon ami?" The doors and windows were secured. No servant entered the display room during the critical moments. "And the timing?" "None. It could only be someone present in that room." The interviews were conducted in the small study, a room redolent with the scent of leather-bound books and wood polish. Frederick Whitmore was the first to be questioned. "Financial difficulties, Mr. Whitmore?" Poirot inquired gently. Frederick's face flushed. "I don't see what my personal affairs have to do with this." "Your aunt's announcement, it displeased you?" "Naturally, I was disappointed," he admitted. "Those plates have been in our family for generations. But I would never harm Aunt Constance." Olivia Whitmore, elegant even in distress, was more forthcoming. "Lady Constance and I have had our differences," she confessed. "Once she accused me of attempting to steal a Qing vase, which was utterly ridiculous. I was merely examining it." "You have knowledge of antiques, madame." "I was an antiques dealer before my marriage," she replied with a touch of pride. "That's how Frederick and I met." Professor Chambers, when questioned, removed his spectacles and polished them nervously. "I had expressed concerns about 2 plates in the collection," he revealed. "Not the phoenix or the dragon, but others. Their provenance seemed questionable." Miss Devonish was tearful. "I've served Lady Constance for 15 years, she said, dabbing at her eyes. "She's been more than an employer. She's family to me. I could never wish her harm. As for that dreadful nephew of hers, you do not care for Mr. Whitmore. He visits only when he wants money," she sniffed disdainfully. Mr. Harker admitted that Sotheby's had hoped to auction the collection. "A private sale to the British Museum would mean no commission for us," he explained. "But stealing the plates? Preposterous. Their value lies in the complete set." Dr. Chen spoke of similar plates in other collections. "The craftsmanship is exceptional," she acknowledged, "but not unique. What makes Lady Constance's set remarkable is its completeness." Mr. Fortescue was the most reluctant interviewee. "Client confidentiality," he protested, until Poirot gently reminded him that his client had been poisoned. Finally, he disclosed that Lady Constance had recently changed her will. "The plates were specifically mentioned," he said uneasily. "She intended the collection for the British Museum, but now," he shrugged, "if she dies, they go to Frederick after all. What remains of them, at least." After the interviews, Poirot made a discovery that caused his eyes to light up with that familiar gleam. Hidden in the display cabinet was a small compartment containing what appeared to be another plate. "A forgery," he declared, "designed to replace one of the originals." That night, despite police guards posted at every door, 2 more plates vanished from their pedestals, those depicting the tiger and the tortoise. In their place was found a cryptic note. "4 have returned home. 9 remain. This grows increasingly bizarre." I remarked, as Poirot and I conferred in our bedroom. Rain lashed against the windows, and occasional thunder rumbled in the distance. "On the contrary, mon ami," replied Poirot, carefully arranging his toiletries on the dresser in perfect symmetry. "It begins to make a curious kind of sense." "You have a theory?" "I have several," he admitted. "But I require more facts before I can determine which is correct." "And the note? What could it mean?" Poirot's fingers smoothed his moustache thoughtfully. "The plates are returning home, it says. But to where and why?" A flash of lightning illuminated his face, revealing an expression of intense concentration. One thing becomes clear, Hastings. We are not dealing with a common thief, but someone with a purpose, someone who knows the true significance of these 13 dinner plates. As the storm continued to rage outside, I could not suppress a feeling of foreboding. 4 plates gone, and Lady Constance fighting for her life. What would the morning bring? Chapter 4. The Pattern Emerges morning brought the grim news that Lady Constance had succumbed to the poison during the night, never having regained consciousness. A somber mood descended upon Ravenswood Manor, rendering even the bright winter sunshine that streamed through the windows powerless to dispel the gloom. Inspector Morton, his face lined with fatigue, paced the library floor. "This is now a murder investigation," he announced. "I'm inclined to arrest Frederick Whitmore immediately. The motive is clear. With his aunt's death, he inherits what remains of the collection." Poirot, who had been contemplating the garden through the window, turned sharply. "None, mon ami. That would be premature. There are too many threads yet to untangle." Mr. Poirot, with all due respect. "Inspector, I ask for 24 hours. No more. If I have not illuminated the truth by then, you may proceed as you wish." Morton hesitated, then grudgingly acquiesced. 24 hours, Mr. Poirot, not a minute more." After the inspector had departed to question the servants, Poirot turned to me with unusual animation. "Hastings, we must examine the remaining plates at once. I have borrowed something of interest from Professor Chambers." He produced a small ultraviolet lamp from his pocket. "The good professor uses this to detect repairs and alterations in porcelain." We hastened to the display room where the 9 remaining plates sat forlornly on their pedestals. Poirot carefully examined each with the special lamp, his features intent. "Fowler!" he exclaimed suddenly. "Observe, Hastings." I peered at the plate depicting a horse, but could discern nothing unusual until Poirot pointed to tiny markings on the reverse side, visible only under the ultraviolet light. "These are not Chinese characters," I remarked. "Indeed not. They are modern, a code of some kind." He examined the other plates, finding similar markings on each. Most interesting indeed." Later that morning, Poirot requested detailed background information on all the guests. Inspector Morton, eager for progress, promptly complied. The results proved illuminating. Dr. Chen had once worked at a museum where several valuable artifacts had mysteriously disappeared. Harker, despite his impeccable appearance, had connections to a notorious art smuggling ring. Most surprising of all, Professor Chambers had faced accusations of selling forgeries early in his career, though the charges were eventually dropped. "The web grows more tangled," observed Poirot as we reviewed the information in our room. "Each of our guests harbors secrets, it seems. But which one poisoned Lady Constance and stole the plates? There you touch upon the central question, mon ami. Perhaps it is not one person, but several. A conspiracy, perhaps?" A knock at the door interrupted our discussion. It was Inspector Morton, looking concerned. "Mr. Poirot, I've arranged for the remaining plates to be moved to the bank vault in the village, as you suggested. The armored transport will arrive within the hour." "Excellent, Inspector. Until then, I presume the plates remain under guard?" "2 of my best men are watching them, sir." Despite these precautions, disaster struck once more. As the time approached to move the plates, a commotion erupted from different parts of the house simultaneously. 3 more plates had vanished, each from a different room where they had been temporarily placed during preparations for transport. Poirot rushed to the scene, his face grave. On one of the empty pedestals lay another note. 7 have returned. 6 remain. Inspector Morton was beside himself. "This is impossible. How could the thief be in 3 places at once?" "Not impossible, Inspector," replied Poirot. "Merely ingenious. I believe I now know the identity of our thief, or thieves, and the true meaning of these 13 dinner plates." "Then for heaven's sake tell us," demanded Frederick Whitmore, who had appeared in the doorway, his face haggard with strain. "All in good time, monsieur. First, there are one or two small matters to verify. This evening, I shall reveal all." The anticipation was palpable as the household gathered in the library after dinner. The remaining 6 plates had been placed under the strictest security, with armed officers guarding them. Poirot stood before the assembled company, immaculate as always in his formal attire, his green eyes bright with that peculiar gleam that I knew so well. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we stand at the threshold of understanding a mystery that spans not days but decades. The affair of the 13 dinner plates is not simply about theft or even murder. It concerns a secret hidden in plain sight for half a century." He paced slowly, his hands behind his back. "I am now prepared to tell you the true significance of these remarkable artifacts and the identity of those responsible for the crimes committed in this house." The tension in the room was electric. Frederick Whitmore clutched the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. Olivia's face remained impassive, but her eyes followed Poirot's every movement. Professor Chambers polished his glasses nervously, while Dr. Chen sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable. "The 13 plates," Poirot continued, "are not what they appear. They are." At that precise moment, the lights throughout the manor flickered and went out, plunging us into complete darkness. A collective gasp arose from the assembled guests. I heard Poirot's voice cut through the darkness. "Remain calm, everyone. Do not move." Seconds later, the emergency generator activated, restoring partial illumination. Relief washed over me as I saw Poirot standing exactly where he had been, apparently unharmed, but his expression had changed to one of grim satisfaction as he gazed at the doorway. "As I anticipated," he murmured. "The final move in our chess game." I followed his gaze to see that another plate had vanished from where it had been displayed on a side table. "Poirot," I exclaimed, "another plate is gone." "Yes, mon ami," he replied calmly. "And now we shall learn the truth." Chapter 5. The 13th Plate. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot announced, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "we will now proceed to the library. There is much to explain, and I believe we shall find our missing friend waiting for us there." We followed him in bewildered silence. True to his word, upon entering the library, Inspector Morton was already examining a plate that had been placed prominently on the desk, the newly vanished peacock plate. "Ah," said Poirot with satisfaction. "The final piece of our puzzle. Mr. Poirot," demanded the inspector, "what is the meaning of this? How did you know this plate would be here?" "Because, mon ami, this was never about the plates themselves, at least not in the way we imagined." Poirot gestured for everyone to be seated. "What I am about to reveal will astonish you." The room fell silent as Poirot took up position before the fireplace, the dancing flames casting his shadow large upon the wall behind him. "The 13 dinner plates," he began, "are not Ming Dynasty originals at all, but exceptional forgeries created approximately 50 years ago." A collective murmur of disbelief filled the room. "Impossible," protested Professor Chambers. "I examined them myself and found inconsistencies in at least 2 of them," countered Poirot. "Your expertise was not at fault, Professor. They are indeed masterful forgeries, perhaps the finest ever created, but forgeries nonetheless." Frederick Whitmore leapt to his feet. "Are you suggesting my aunt's prized collection was worthless?" "On the contrary, monsieur, they are of inestimable value, but not for the reasons you imagine." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The true secret of the 13 plates lies within the porcelain itself. Each contains a section of microfilm, a fragment of a map leading to a cache of stolen art from World War II. The shock in the room was palpable. "Doctor," Jen's calm demeanor slipped momentarily, while Olivia Whitmore's knuckles whitened as she gripped the arms of her chair. "Lady Constance's late husband, Sir Edward," continued Poirot, "was involved in recovering looted art. but it seems he secretly kept certain pieces. The identifying marks Lady Constance mentioned were not about authenticity. They were indicators of which section of the map each plate contained. But who killed Lady Constance? Demanded Inspector Morton. And who stole the plates? Ah, said Poirot, raising a finger. There we come to the most complex part of our mystery. For the thief was not one person, but three working in concert. Madame Olivia Whitmore, Professor Chambers, and Dr. Chen. Olivia started to protest, but Poirot silenced her with a raised hand. Madame Whitmore discovered the secret of the plates through her background in antiques. Professor Chambers provided the technical expertise to extract the microfilm, and Dr. Chen had connections to return the stolen art to its original owners in China. You have no proof of this, sputtered Professor Chambers. On the contrary, replied Poirot. The ultraviolet lamp revealed modern code, not ancient markings. Your fingerprints, Professor, were found on the hidden compartment, and the note about the plates returning home, a clear reference to repatriating the stolen artifacts to China. Inspector Morton looked bewildered. But the murder— Ah, yes, said Poirot, his expression darkening. The murder of Lady Constance was not part of their plan. That was committed by Monsieur Frederick Whitmore, who had discovered the conspiracy and attempted to prevent it. All eyes turned to Frederick, who had gone deathly pale. You poisoned your own aunt, Poirot continued relentlessly, using a substance derived from a rare Chinese herb, provided unwittingly by Dr. Chen for your botanical research. You hoped to stop the plates from disappearing and preserve your inheritance. Instead, you accelerated the conspirators' timeline. This is outrageous. Frederick sputtered. Where is your evidence? In your greenhouse, monsieur. The police will find traces of the poison among your specimens, and your fingerprints are on the forged plate, the one you planned to substitute after removing the original. Inspector Morton had already signaled to his officers. As Frederick was restrained, Poirot turned to the others. The missing plates have been recovered from a hidden compartment in Professor Chambers' luggage. All 13 will now be properly examined by experts. Later that evening, as Poirot and I sat in the quiet of our room, I asked the question that had been troubling me. How did you know, Poirot? What led you to the solution? He smiled, touching his mustache. The pattern of which plates were taken first revealed knowledge of their true significance. The phoenix and the dragon, symbols of imperial power in China. Also, the forged plate in the cabinet was actually better crafted than the originals, suggesting that the forgeries were the true treasures. I shook my head in amazement. And the 13th plate? The peacock? Ah, the key to everything, mon ami. In Chinese symbolism, the peacock represents immortality, but also vigilance. It contained the key to decoding all the other map fragments. Without it, the locations would remain forever mysterious. As we returned to London the following day, Poirot gazed pensively at the passing countryside. Objects of beauty often conceal ugly secrets. Hastings, he mused, and these 13 dinner plates told a story 50 years in the making, a story of greed, deception, and ultimately justice long delayed.